The forest was older than memory. Pines so tall they leaned toward heaven, their branches black against the sky, their trunks dense enough to swallow light. In winter, snow crusted their crowns until they gleamed like teeth. In summer, they exhaled resin and shadows. Travelers who wandered too far into these ridges rarely returned, and if they did, they spoke little of what they'd seen. It was into this silence that 5-year-old Sarah Whitfield vanished. Crawling from every corner of the world, come the stories that should never be told. Creepy stories from around the world. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It truly helps us make more of this type of content. She and her mother, Evelyn, lived in the city, an apartment above a laundromat where the constant hum of machines mixed with traffic below. Life was noisy, hurried, and strangely safe in its anonymity. Evelyn was careful, protective, the kind of mother who never let her daughter out of sight in crowds. But evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it walks right through fluorescent light. On a gray Saturday morning, Evelyn took Sarah to Harrington's Market, a cavernous grocery with aisles that seemed to stretch forever. Sarah clutched her mother's hand as they passed towers of cereal boxes and bins of apples. She was small, bright-eyed, and full of chatter, always asking for candy. "Can we get gummy worms this time?" she begged. "After we pay," Evelyn said, wrestling a sack of flour from the bottom shelf. The bag was heavier than expected. She hoisted it into the cart, turned back, and Sarah was gone. At first, she thought her daughter had darted to the next aisle. "Sarah?" she called, voice light, no answer. She hurried forward, checked the end cap, the candy aisle, the bakery. Still no Sarah. Her voice grew sharp. "Sarah!" Heads turned. Evelyn's chest clamped as she sprinted to the restroom, then the checkout lanes. A clerk pointed toward the rear exit, which stood ajar, a crate propping it open. Evelyn burst through into the alley, empty pavement, the faint smell of exhaust. Witnesses would later recall a man in plain clothes, cap pulled low, guiding a little girl into a waiting van. It had looked like a father hurrying his child. By the time security checked cameras, the van had disappeared into the maze of city streets. Evelyn's screams echoed off concrete walls. The days blurred into nightmare. Police flooded the market, questioning shoppers. News anchors repeated Sarah's description. 5 years old, brown hair, green eyes, wearing a yellow raincoat. Posters with her school photo were stapled to poles, pasted in subway stations, taped in laundromats. Evelyn haunted the precinct. Every night she demanded updates, her eyes red from sleeplessness. She returned home only to sit in Sarah's room, where drawings still hung on the walls, bright suns, stick-figure families holding hands. She clutched Sarah's stuffed rabbit to her chest until her body shook. The city kept moving. Traffic roared, trains screeched, neon signs blinked. But for Evelyn, time stopped. Every crowd was a blur of strangers hiding the face she longed to see. Every ringing phone was a chance at ransom or closure or hope. None were. Weeks stretched into months. The posters yellowed in the rain. Detectives grew tight-lipped. Neighbors stopped knocking with casseroles. Evelyn was left with silence inside a city that never truly slept. But Sarah was alive, far from the lights of Harrington's Market, already swallowed by the pines. The van drove for hours, leaving the city behind. Streets narrowed to roads, roads to dirt tracks. Towering pines closed in, blotting out the sun. At last, the vehicle stopped in a clearing where cabins circled a crude wooden chapel. A gaunt man with white hair and eyes like cold water stepped forward. He called himself Elias, the shepherd of the pines. He told Sarah she had been chosen, plucked from a world of corruption. He said her mother had let her go, that her old life was gone. Sarah screamed until her throat broke. She begged for her mother, cried herself to sleep on a straw pallet. No one listened. Days became weeks. The children woke at dawn to the clang of the chapel bell. They knelt on rough planks until their knees ached, then worked, hauling logs, milking goats, preserving food for the endless winters. Questions were punished. Disobedience meant days without food or nights locked in the reflection cell, a root cellar so dark it swallowed your hands. Sarah learned silence. She learned obedience. Children adapt. They have no choice. But she never forgot the city lights, or the neon glow outside her apartment window, or the hum of buses rattling past. By the time she was 10, Sarah had learned how to hide her tears. The other children, too, wore blank faces, careful not to show softness where Elias's eyes could find it. They learned to work hard and silently, to keep their heads bowed, to believe what they were told. But childhood has a stubborn way of clinging, even in darkness. Sometimes, when chores were done and the sun dipped behind the tree line, the children would slip away to a hollow behind the goat pens. There they whispered secret games. They drew crooked hopscotch grids in the dirt with sticks, though none of them remembered the rules exactly. They told half-remembered stories of cartoons, of neon lights, of fast food restaurants they had glimpsed before being taken. Sarah once mentioned elevators, and the others laughed like she'd invented the word. At night, the rituals grew stranger. The cult believed the forest was alive, that the pines themselves listened. Elias would order the children to lie flat on the ground, staring into the sky, and repeat phrases until their throats ached. Sometimes he made them stand barefoot in snow until their lips turned blue, teaching them that pain was purification. Other nights, they circled fires while Elias spoke in a voice both mesmerizing and hollow, telling them that outside the trees, the cities were burning with corruption. Sarah listened, but pieces of memory slipped in. The hum of traffic through her bedroom window, the flicker of neon outside their apartment, her mother's laugh as they folded laundry together on the couch. None of it matched Elias's tales of ruin. And though she buried those thoughts deep, they rooted quietly in her heart. As she grew older, her questions sharpened. Why did the elders eat more meat than the children? Why did Elias preach purity while choosing young brides for himself and his closest men? Once, when she asked, she was dragged into the reflection cell. Alone in the dark, she pressed her palms to the dirt and thought of her mother, and she promised herself never to ask again, at least not out loud. Her hands hardened with calluses from splitting wood. Her shoulders grew strong carrying water buckets from the creek. She learned to move silently, to make herself small. By 16, Sarah was adept at fading into the background, a shadow in plain sight. But inside, a flicker remained. When Sarah turned 18, she was prepared for the ceiling. Every girl was. Elias had chosen her husband, a farmer with a salt and pepper beard and eyes flat as stone. The night of the ceremony, Sarah wore white linen. The congregation sang their broken hymn. Elias laid his hand on her head, and then it hit her. Not the memory of candy jars or city streets, but the smell of her mother's embrace on stormy nights. The warmth of Evelyn's arms wrapped around her in their small apartment when thunder rattled the windows. The faint scent of soap and detergent from the laundromat below. Her mother's voice whispering reassurance. It's only thunder. I'm here. The memory burned through her like lightning. It was not a dream. It was real. Her mother had not abandoned her. She had been loved. Suddenly the chapel wasn't sacred, just crude timber. Elias wasn't divine, only a cruel old man. The congregation weren't saints, only prisoners. Sarah's heart thundered louder than the storm she remembered. For the first time in 13 years, she knew the truth. She had been stolen. Realization was not freedom. Escape was nearly impossible. Guards patrolled the dirt road. Dogs prowled at night. The forest stretched endless, and those who tried to flee were dragged back bloodied, locked for weeks in the cellar. So Sarah waited. At first, she measured her days in heartbeats. Every hour was a test of patience, a grinding march of work and ritual. She forced her face into the same dull mask as the others, whispering prayers she no longer believed, bowing her head when Elias passed, her heart a drum she prayed no one else could hear. By night, she schemed. In the darkness of her pallet, she pressed crumbs of bread into a rag and tucked them beneath a loose plank. She sharpened a broken spoon against stone until its edge bit her finger. She taught herself to read the language of the guards, the lazy one who left his post early to drink, the one whose cough gave away his position in the trees, the way the dogs' barking changed when they were fed scraps too late. The reflection cell haunted her. Each time Elias passed judgment on another child, locking them in that root-choked dark, Sarah's stomach twisted. Some emerged silent and hollow-eyed. Others spoke of whispers that weren't their own, voices that urged them to kneel deeper, obey harder. Sarah didn't know if the voices were real or born of terror, but she feared both possibilities. Dreams came to her in fragments. her mother's arms around her during storms, the neon sign that blinked outside their apartment window, and sometimes Elias's face would intrude, bending low to whisper, "Run if you like. The pines will take you back. They always do." She woke with her throat raw from silent screams. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons turned, the same way Elias promised that obedience turned children into saints. Snow blanketed the cabins, melted into mud, bloomed into spring. Sarah carried her secret resolve like a second heartbeat, hidden but insistent. She drew maps in the dirt with her toe, then scuffed them away before dawn. She scratched a compass rose into the underside of her bunk with a nail, whispering its directions to herself each night until it became a prayer stronger than Elias's sermons. She grew close to the younger children, comforting them with half-remembered stories of the city. Elevators that climbed like magic, candy that came in bags bigger than your fist. She spoke of these things softly, as if telling fairy tales, but each word was a seed. She wanted them to know there was another world, even if she never made it out to see it again. The waiting carved her thin, but it also sharpened her. Her silence became armor, her smallness a cloak. By the time nearly a year had passed, Sarah no longer looked like prey. She looked like someone who had learned how to vanish in plain sight. And that invisibility was the sharpest tool she had. It was nearly a year after her sealing when chance came. A storm tore across the mountains, lashing rain and wind. Guards huddled in shelters, dogs chained, visibility poor. Sarah's heart hammered as she slipped from her cabin, clutching her pack. This was it, the moment she had waited months for. She ran. The forest tore at her, branches clawing her skin, mud sucked at her boots. Behind her, the bell tolled, her absence discovered. Voices shouted, dogs bayed. She stumbled through undergrowth, slid down ravines, waded creeks swollen with storm water. Once a dog lunged, jaws snapping, but she struck it with a branch and fled. All night she pressed forward, compass trembling in her hand. Her body begged for rest, but fear drove her on. At dawn she saw it, smoke rising in the distance, thick and steady. Chimneys, not campfires. Civilization. She stumbled into Ashford, a logging town of 1,500 souls. Its main street was lined with clapboard houses, trucks coated in pine dust, the scent of sawmills sharp in the air. The saws shrieked in the distance, the sounds strange and mechanical after years of nothing but wind and chanting voices. At first, no one moved toward her. People paused on porches, cigarettes dangling, groceries clutched halfway to cars. A child pointed at her from the bed of a truck before his mother snatched his hand down. Sarah must have looked like a ghost, thin, pale, clothes stitched by hand. Mud streaked her face, her hair matted to her cheeks. She tried to speak, but the words rasped, breaking into fragments. "Help, please, they'll come." A silence fell over the street. Then kindness surged forward, hesitant but human. An older woman in a wool cardigan approached, her hands out as if calming a frightened animal. She draped her coat around Sarah's shoulders, muttering, "Lord above, child." Her touch was warm, almost unbearably so after years of cold hands and colder words. A logger brought a thermos from his truck, pressing steaming coffee into Sarah's hands. The bitter heat burned her tongue, but she clung to the cup like an anchor. Tears stung her eyes, not from the pain, but from the realization that this was something freely given, without demand, without Elias's voice hovering above it. The murmurs started quickly. Where'd she come from? She looks half dead. Out of the pines, maybe. Someone whispered Elias's name, as if the cult were an open secret. The kind of thing everyone knew but never spoke about above a hush. Heads turned toward the tree line even as they stared at Sarah, half expecting others to emerge from the woods behind her. The deputy met her at the edge of Main Street. His uniform was neat, but his eyes carried doubt. He guided her into the small sheriff's office, its linoleum floor gleaming under fluorescent lights. Sarah blinked against the brightness. It was so sharp it hurt, as if the room itself were a dream. She sat on a hard chair, her coat still clutched tight. The deputy asked questions, his voice careful, almost patronizing. Where had she come from? What was her name? Did she have family? Her answers tumbled out haltingly. Her name, the cabins, the chapel, the reflection cell, the dogs, the smell of pine pitch and smoke. She drew shaky sketches of the compound with the stub of a pencil he gave her. At first, he thought she was delusional. Another drifter spun out by isolation. But then Sarah rolled back her sleeves. The deputy stared at the scars on her wrists, the thin rope burns that never healed. She flinched violently when the church bell across town rang the noon hour, her whole body folding in on itself. The deputy's skepticism cracked. He stepped into the hallway, speaking in low tones to his secretary. The phone began to ring. Word spread faster than Sarah could breathe. She heard the mutter of voices outside the office window, footsteps gathering, the uneasy hum of a small town suddenly realizing a nightmare had walked out of the woods and into their midst. Sarah sat very still, steam curling from the forgotten coffee in her lap, watching the fluorescent lights buzz overhead. She was in the world again, but it felt fragile, as if it might dissolve at any second and leave her back in the pines. Within days, black SUVs rolled up the logging roads, helicopters beat overhead. The FBI spread maps across Ashford's diner tables, radios crackling with coordination. Sarah's sketches guided them. Her trembling hands drew every cabin, every guard post. When the raid began, Sarah stood on a ridge and watched. Armored vehicles rumbled into the clearing, floodlights split the night. The cult bell clanged, but its alarm was drowned by engines. Gunfire cracked, shouts rang out, then silence. When agents emerged, they carried children, thin, blinking, clutching strangers' hands. Sarah wept as she saw their faces, kids she had promised not to abandon. The newspapers called it the Pines Rescue. Reporters crowded sidewalks. Politicians made speeches about vigilance. But for Sarah, the triumph was quieter. Back in the city, she sat in a precinct lobby while rescued children ate sandwiches under buzzing fluorescent lights. She imagined the moment the doors would open and Evelyn would rush in, arms outstretched, tears falling. She pictured the embrace she had carried in her heart for 13 years, thunder and soap and warmth returning to her at last. But Evelyn did not come. When the reporters drifted away, when the FBI packed up their maps and trucks, Sarah was left with silence. Freedom was a vast, dizzying thing. The city's roar, the glitter of lights at night, the simple abundance of food on every corner. She should have felt whole, but there was a hole in her heart that none of it filled. Her first thought, always, was her mother, Evelyn. She had dreamed of her for 13 years, heard her voice in thunder, carried the scent of her hair like a secret talisman. Now she told herself she would find her again. She would go back to that apartment above the laundromat, or wherever her mother lived now, and they would hold each other the way they were meant to. Sarah asked the caseworkers. She gave them Evelyn's name, her old address. She begged them for news. At first they hesitated. Then a man from the victim support unit sat across from her, his hands folded tightly. His eyes told her the truth before his lips could. Evelyn had lived for years with a singular devotion, searching, waiting, pleading with police who had long since moved on. Every anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, she lit candles, stapled new flyers even when the paper curled yellow, spoke her daughter's name to anyone who would listen. On the 10th anniversary, the silence finally became too heavy. Evelyn had taken her own life, leaving no note, only a photograph of Sarah propped on her nightstand. Sarah listened without breathing. The city outside the window blared with horns and sirens, but inside she felt nothing but a terrible stillness. The reunion she had clung to in dreams was gone. The arms she remembered in thunderstorms would never hold her again. But Evelyn's love had carried her through the dark, even beyond death. That love had been real, unshaken, unbroken, and now it lived in Sarah. Sarah stood one evening on the roof of the halfway home where she was staying. The skyline glittered, neon lights buzzing the way she remembered from childhood. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of rain on hot concrete, soap drifting from the laundromat below. She whispered into the night, "I made it, Mama. I'm here. I'll live the life you wanted for me, and I'll never stop carrying you." The wind stirred her hair, and somewhere far behind her, the mountains lay shrouded in shadow. But Sarah did not look back. She had survived. She had freed the children, and though her mother was gone, her love remained. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It truly helps us make more of this type of content.